Okay, so I am from the University of California, Irvine. I am in molecular biology and biochemistry. I'm also interim associate dean for the Division of Teaching Excellence and Innovation. This is our fancy new, where's the laser? This is our fancy new building, our Anteater Learning Pavilion that I'll be talking about today. And here we go. So, as with your institutions, UC Irvine is committed to our student success. This is one of our pillars of our strategic plan. Are we succeeding? By a lot of outside metrics, it looks like we are. So we are the 7th best public institution now according to US News and World Report. We have been named twice in a row the institution doing the most for the American dream by the New York Times. We're number 3 on Money Magazine's list and number 4 on Forbes' list. But if we really dive down into the data, and because of time I don't have time to show you the data, our at-risk students aren't doing as well. And so that's important at our campus. We're a third underrepresented minority, about 40% low income, 50% first gen. We're a Hispanic serving institution. And so it's important that we know that we not only bring these students to our campus, but they're able to succeed once they get here. And so we do know that our at-risk students are earning lower grades in most of our STEM courses. We know that they are more likely than the non-at-risk students to transfer to a non-STEM major, and they're less likely to graduate in 4 years. Overall, we're doing really well. The non-at-risk students are graduating in 4 years at like a 90% rate, and our URMs are probably closer to the 70% range. So things are still good overall, but there clearly is a difference. So how are we aiming to achieve equity on campus? There have been a number of reports that have come out over the past couple decades showing various ways that institutions can accomplish this, and many of them are through evidence-based teaching practices, things like active learning, high-structure courses. Those are things that improve learning for everyone and seem to beneficially help at-risk students. And so how are we at UC Irvine aiming to get more of these evidence-based practices into the classroom? And the two things I'm going to tell you are about increasing our investment in active learning, as well as some work we're doing looking at teaching faculty on our campuses. So, a lot of literature as well as conversations from your colleagues. You know there are barriers to implementing active learning, lack of training, lack of time and incentives, classroom space limitations. If you're in these 500-person auditoriums, it's hard to talk to the students and get them to talk to each other, and lack of buy-in from home institutions. And so when we thought about this, we really wanted to have sort of a multi-prong approach to doing this. The center of the multi-prong approach is a very expensive building, which I realized that not everyone can just, let's plop down $50 million and build a new building. But I think what we could sort of, the lesson that can be learned from this is that, so our campus committed to building more classroom space. 5 or 10 years ago, they said, we need to build more classroom space. And there were leaders at the top that were pushing that if we're going to build this space, why not build it in an active learning format? So this didn't come out of thin air that, hey, we really need an active learning building. The campus had already committed to building classrooms, and that just sort of being able to push them in that direction was really helpful. So we always have construction on our campus. If it's the same as yours, those conversations might be ones that you could have. So this is the Anteater Learning Pavilion. It is all the classrooms in the Anteater Learning Pavilion are built for active learning, but they're also built for faculty to be comfortable doing traditional lecturing. There's a front of all the classes, so you could stand there and lecture the entire time if you wanted, but there's also a variety of facilities in there that allow you to implement active learning. We have 2 lecture halls, one a 400-person, one a 250-person. These are, the main hallmarks are that there's space between the rows. So instructors, TAs, learning assistants, they can walk through the rows and talk to all the students. The seats go 360 degrees, so you can talk to the people behind you and in front of you. I remember, so this building just opened in September. I remember I was telling my students in spring how the chairs would go all the way around, and there were audible gasps at how excited they were that their chairs could go all the way around. I thought they were making fun of me or something. I didn't understand. There are also smaller rooms as well, 20 to 100-person rooms with either these movable chairs or set up in pods, and then we have some computer labs. So at any given time, there could be up to around 1,500 students in the Anteater Learning Pavilion. We also wanted to make it a destination outside of class time as well. So most of our classroom buildings have classrooms and bathrooms. So if you are not in class anymore and you don't have to go to the bathroom, you leave the building. So we have a lot of informal study spaces, and students can sit in these areas. They can reserve this room. Faculty can reserve the room to talk to students before or after class. So you'll go to the building at 8 in the morning, and there'll be students there working and interacting, and you'll go home at 8 at night, and you can still see students working there as well. Now, one question is, we have the brand new building. How are we going to train our faculty to use it? You can't just throw them in there and hope they'll figure it out. So we created an Active Learning Institute. And so this is a course that meets for 8 periods, about 2 hours each period. 30 faculty are taking the institute at a time. They model active learning techniques. They are interacting with their peers. They do readings on active learning. They reflect on their own teaching. They get time to build active learning activities in their own courses. And then after, what we do is we do classroom observations using the COPUS protocol on all faculty that go in the institute. And then we bring them back every now and then so they can come and talk and share ideas and troubles that they've run into. So far, we have 150 active learning certified faculty. We have another 60 or so taking it in the spring, and we have a wait list that carries on into the fall. So by the end of spring, it'll be somewhere around 20% of our faculty will be active learning certified. Why are they doing that? We give them a small little carrot that if you are certified, you get to schedule your classes in the building first. But in my mind, is that worth 20 hours of your time if you just wanted that? It seems pretty small. So I think it says a lot about our culture that our faculty are really actually willing to go through that. We also want to make sure we're measuring the impact of the new building. So we have a variety of questions we're asking. So for example, is active learning actually happening in the active learning building? If so, is it impacting student performance? We have surveys that are capturing a number of non-cognitive measures like sense of belonging. And if so, are the impacts different for different kinds of students? And so we're working to collect a whole bunch of data, student data, faculty data, course performance, and classroom observation data to see if that's being or occurring. So again, the whole idea is that, yes, the building's amazing, but I think you can't just have the building. You have to build the message into it, and you have to build the support structures into it as well, and hopefully we'll see if it ends up being successful. The other thing I quickly want to touch on are teaching professors. So this is perhaps the only meeting where I don't really have to describe what these are. LSOE, Lecturer with Security of Employment. These are UC-wide, so every campus, every undergraduate serving campus has at least one, but some of them might only have one. And there are some campuses that have more than them. These are tenure track positions, and they are evaluated on the same tenets as traditional research faculty. So teaching, scholarly activity, and service, but obviously the teaching is going to be weighed more heavily on those promotions. And the idea is that we are supposed to be individuals who have both discipline-specific expertise as well as teaching or education expertise. And so the thinking is we're going to put these people in departments, and they could talk about biology or chemistry or math or whatever it may be. But these are also people that, in theory, know a lot about teaching, and so I could go to them and if I have questions, and I can learn new things about teaching. So again, in theory, we could be having major impacts on the education mission of our institution. So we could be improving student outcomes, we could be serving as teaching resources for our colleagues, and we could be impacting how our colleagues teach. And so I'm going to share a little bit of preliminary data we have in regards to those last 2 points. So the first question, are LSVs serving as resources for departmental colleagues? The way we tried to address that is through social network analysis. So what social network analysis allows you to do is that you can take a group and you can see how individuals within that group interact with each other and who talks to who within that group. And so we had a 3-question survey during the past year with whom did you discuss research activities, whom did you discuss instructional activities, and who do you consider to be influential on your teaching. And so basically the way it works is you'll have a question, and then you'll have a drop-down menu that has all the individuals in that department. So in this department, I think Abby and Edgar are really influential on my teaching, so I'll click those off. And then all the other faculty in the department will take that same survey and check off who they think are influential. So we surveyed over a dozen STEM departments at 3 UC campuses using this survey. And we're still working on analyzing the data, but I have one example plot to show you. And so this is answering the question, who do you consider to be influential on your teaching? So this random biology department, it's not my department, unfortunately. But what you see here is each little dot represents an individual in that group. And so we've color-coded the dots. So we have the red are the traditional research faculty, the green are the LSOEs, and the blue we pointed out the vice chair, because the vice chair in this case seemed to be pretty influential as well. And so what you notice are there are arrows connecting the dots, and so except for these sad people over here. But for most of the dots, there's arrows. And so the arrows could be unidirectional, where I really think that person is influential on my teaching, but unfortunately they don't think I'm influential on theirs, so it's only going one way. But there are also the cases where you're sharing the love, and that person also is influential, so the arrows can be going both ways as well. And the size of the dots represent how many individuals are picking you as someone for this particular question who is influential on your teaching. So we see here that the LSOEs are central. They're in the middle of the network, so they're interacting with the people who get a lot of shout-outs in the question. And then also, particularly this individual here, seems to be the most influential person in the department in regards to the teaching. So again, we have many more departments that we're currently analyzing, but this is one example. Those are you're right. In this department, there are only 2 LSOEs, and they happen to be central figures. The sort of follow-up question that we care about a little bit more is, are they improving their colleagues' teaching? So the idea is that if you are talking to the green person here, and this green person, first we have to verify that they are using active learning, but if we can verify that they are implementing active learning practices, is this person who talks to the green person more likely to also use active learning practices than an individual who doesn't talk to one of the LSOEs? And so the way we're working to do that is using DART, which Mike brought up before, and we can basically, on a departmental level, capture teaching practices for all the individuals in the department, and then overlay those on top of these network graphs. We do have some data showing that whether or not LSOEs are improving their colleagues' teaching. One thing we did was we interviewed about 30 dean's chairs and hiring committee chairs for 3 different UC campuses. And so we're still about halfway through coding the data, but we found some pretty common trend that is summarized by this quote. I think the benefits of having LSOEs are having resources for all the faculty with respect to teaching, learning from them what works and what doesn't. I think all of us as faculty really care about our teaching, but like everything else, we all have limited time. And I think the idea that they can test things out, come up with best practices, and share with us, to me, is very attractive. And so this was a sentiment that was shared by pretty much all of the interviews that we have looked at so far. But surprisingly, a lot of it was unexpected, that the people we were interviewing didn't necessarily expect to see that when they were doing these hires. This was sort of a happy surprise that came out of it. And sort of to that point, this is something we commonly saw as well, this idea. So we're trying to balance our teaching load with our ability to hire faculty. Obviously, research faculty are quite expensive. We have neither money nor space to hire very many research faculty to keep up with our increasing teaching load. And that's pretty much why we hired LSOEs. So we're sort of a cheap date, and we can fill a lot of the loads. And so I understand that from a logistical perspective, but I do think, the fact that this is coming out of it is really powerful as well, that whether they intended or not, it seems like a lot of people feel that we are influencing our colleagues. A lot of people highlight issues with the position name, and this is, again, these are the stakeholders. These aren't, I'm not complaining in this interview about it. But the idea, this title indicates a temporary position, it indicates a hired gun, it indicates somebody who's doing, one-off, and then is gone and not an integrated member in the community of faculty. That is terrible. This has actually been a surprising area of contention, that there's been a lot of work system-wide to change the LPSOE position in terms of different benefits and ways that it should be evaluated in regulations. And the position name, in my mind, doesn't really affect anyone except the LSOEs. But there's been quite a bit of pushback on the name change. And so many of us call ourselves teaching professors or professors of teaching. But on my paycheck, it still says lecturer with security of employment. So that's something that maybe we can get changed in the future. There were also a lot of comments in regards to the lack of clarity about the promotion expectation. So the impact of a traditional faculty member's research is measured constantly. The impact of a teaching faculty member, that's a very vague, amorphous thing to measure. I don't think maybe any of us understand how LSOEs are promoted yet. If you don't have peer-reviewed publications, it becomes harder to figure out what the contribution is. I'm not saying it's impossible, I'm just saying it's easier when people have said put the stamp of approval on something. And so that's something that we pretty consistently saw as well, this idea that we've got them here, we want them to be successful, but we're not exactly sure how we can evaluate them. So I think the point of a lot of this is that there are issues with the position. And I think in order to maximize the potential impact of teaching faculty, it's important to look at these and try to address some of these issues. So a lot of this work, the LSOE portion, was supported by NSF, and we were fortunate enough to get a larger NSF grant recently. And we have a lot of things that we want to do with that. One, this idea of what is the impact of LSOEs on student outcomes. And so we're looking at that from an institutional data perspective. If you're a student and you happen to take a course taught by a traditional research faculty versus a teaching faculty versus an adjunct lecturer, what is the outcome going to be? Are you more likely to proceed to the next course? Are you going to get a better grade in the next course? And so there are a lot of things we can look at from a big data perspective in that case. The other thing, or one of the other things we're going to do, as I mentioned, is the DART. And again, I still haven't quite figured out the logistics behind it, but we want to get the view of the entire department. How is the entire department teaching? And so I know Kimberly Tanner's group has been successful at SF State, and so she's part of this grant, as is Melinda Owens, who's recently hired at UCSD, and so she's going to make sure, or they're going to make sure that we're able to accomplish this. The other thing that we promised to do in this NSF grant is we said we wanted to explore these interactions in other STEM departments at other UC campuses, whether or not they have teaching faculty. We want to understand the relationship between teaching networks versus research networks versus other sorts of networks on a broad scale. And so what we got was from each of your campuses, a very important administrator, and you might be the one who did this, said, sure, we'll help with that. And it sounded great to NSF, but now we have to actually do it. And so I appreciate Mike giving me a chance to speak today, because one thing we would like to do is we want to release these surveys in your department. So it's a 3-question survey, not the worst thing in the world. It takes about 5 minutes to fill out. But getting faculty to do anything is not the easiest thing. So what we would like to do is we'd like to talk to people who are potentially interested in doing this. We'll obviously share the data with you. And because one of the main challenges with this work is getting the actual data, you would then be authors on whatever work comes out of it. So if you're interested in that, please contact me, and we would love to work with you. And with that, I'd like to thank all these people.
We have 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
I'll leave my phone out.
Yeah.
Is the difference in, like, they don't have to have startup funds, or is it actual salary?
So we are actually looking at salaries, and we don't have that data yet. It's my understanding that they're supposed to be equal when they start out. I don't know if that's the reality of it, but the bigger thing is the startup package. So a lot of our faculty now require $1 million, more than $1 million to bring them in. They need lab space, all these other sorts of things where we essentially get a little bit of startup and an office, and we're teaching a lot more than the research faculty. Right, so if we're teaching 5 classes versus research faculty teaching 1 or 2, clearly we're carrying more weight there too. I think I see a hand in the back.
So this is pretty amazing work, and I'm just wondering, if this isn't happening, it makes sense, but are you all doing any work around elevating metrics of inclusive teaching in the tenure review and promotion process as you're kind of working with faculty through these programs? And
so how do we make teaching more important in the merit review process? Oh, are we changing the way that we evaluate teaching? So our campuses, actually, so our Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, Diane O'Dowd, has been a big proponent of making teaching of value in the merit promotion process. She has implemented a change where you now need 2 pieces of evidence, so student evaluations, despite the fact that we all say they're terrible. Of course, we need student evaluations, The second component can be a reflective teaching statement, so the thinking of why do I teach the way I do, how do I change things in my classroom. It's a very small step, but it is a step in the right direction. And even though it's a small step, she's gotten a ton of pushback for that as well.